Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Maseches Megillah Daf Test, starting at a new Mishnah at the bottom of Chesed Beis, the Mishnah of Ein Bein, another Mishnah of Ein Bein. This is about the writing of Sifrei Torah, Tefillin, and Mezuzos. And then on the Amud Beis, we'll jump into some other stuff about the Beis HaMikdash. Should be great. Wait a second. Did we do Daf Test already? No. I'm so confused. Okay. Here we go. Says the Gemara, Ein bein svarim l'tefillin u'mezuzos. There's no difference between writing svarim, which is Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim, scrolls, or the parchment of tefillin and mezuzos. Tefillin and mezuzos are in one category. Ella she'asvarim nichtavim b'chol lashon. That is, the svarim of Tanakh can be written in any language. U'tefillin mezuzos eina nichtavin ella ashuris. That tefillin and mezuzos have to be written in ashuris. Ashuris is the language that we have in our Torah, the block letter, the fancy, with a sofer and a scribe, v'chule. Rashbag Omer, he argues on the Tanakama, where the Tanakama had said that by Svarim, by Tanakh, it can be in any language. Omer af b'Svarim, even when it comes to Tanakh, lo hitiru sheyichtav ele Yavanis. It can only be written in Yavanis. Now, obviously, it can also be written in Hebrew. It didn't mean to exclude that. That's how the Torah was given in Hebrew. But the Torah cannot be written b'chol lashon, says the Rashbag against the Tanakama. It can only be written in Hebrew and in Yavanis and in Greek. And we'll see Samari Mekomos that this isn't stam. Yavanis is not just a social language. Its influence is actually from the Torah. We still see it's Yafta Elokim Liyefes, as we'll soon see in the Gemara. So that's what the Mishnah says. The Gemara says that, as has been the theme with the Ein Beins, the Gemara opens with an inference about something else that's common to the two things being compared in the Mishnah. Halatofran begidin, that which we have to stitch things together with gidin, with the sinews of the animal. Ulatame sayadayim zev eshavim. We spoke about this idea before about tumas yadayim, that the scroll makes your hands into shneim latuma. The reason why they did that is because people were leaving their food there, mice were eating the cloth, it was a problem. Anyways, in the halachas of using gid, of using sinews to stitch things together, zev is eshavim. Okay, 3 lines from the bottom on Chesed Beis. We're going to now see a source from a Mishnah in Yadayim, and this is going to be a contradiction to our Mishnah, and we're going to see 5 different approaches, each one rejecting the one prior, 5 different approaches to this machlokes. So let's review what our Mishnah said. The Tanakama said that a sefer, seemingly all svarim Tanakh, can be written b'chol lashon. Fine. Or minhu, we learned in the Mishnah in Yadayim. I'll just be referring to this next line as the Mishnah in Yadayim over the course of the next half of an amud. The Mishnah in Yadayim writes, if you have a mikra, you have a Hebrew word, shekasvo targum, and instead of the Hebrew word that belonged there, you wrote the targum word, or v'targum shekasvo mikra, or the Torah actually used an Aramaic word, and in its place you wrote the Hebrew. Or if you used the Ksav Ivri, which was seemingly an earlier dialect of the Hebrew language, Eino mitame es hayadayim, it will not be mitame the hands, meaning the scroll doesn't yet have the kedusha of a scroll proper. Ad sheyichtevenu, we're supposed to skip the word bichsav. Ad sheyichtevenu ashuris al sefer uvidyo. So this is the shita of the Mishnah in Yadayim against our Tanakama. Our Tanakama said you can write in any language, but here the Mishnah in Yadayim says that it has to be ksav ashuris. So that's a problem, because our Mishnah says, the Tanakama says any language, and here we see, no, it has to be ksav ashuris. So because of that,
is this a different set of characters?
The letters look different. It would be the difference, like, for example, cursive Hebrew and block letters. It's not aleph beis, it's still aleph beis, but it's just different. Not a different language. It's just different style, different font.
22 letters, right?
Bechora. Yeah. It's not so clear, because if you look in Rashi here at the bottom of the page, he refers to this dialect on the very last line of Rashi. He says, Al Aver Hanahar. That was the language of the Ksab by Aver Hanahar. I mean, you have to be a historian buff to know what was going on and what that location is. We don't know what that means. We don't know. I don't know what that means, I should say. But anyways, that's the stira, is that our Mishnah has a very expansive, all languages are allowed, and the Mishnah in Yadayim says it has to be Ashuris. So Amar Rava, this is not a conflict. Lo kasha, no problem. Kan begufan shalanu, kan begufan shalahen. Wow, this is unbelievable. Kan begufan shalanu. What does that mean with the bodies of the letters that we have? Says Rashi, crazy Rashi, to explain the Gemara. Top line, Dibur Maschel, kan begufan shalanu. Masnis in our Mishnah de Katani b'chol lashon, when it says that it can be written in any language, it doesn't mean that any alphabet can be used, but rather b'chol lashon shelo shina es haksav, the letters are the same. Ela sheshinu es halashon. So, for example, if you say, God spoke to the people, then in Ksav Ashuris, God is Gimel Daled, spoke is Samach Pei Vav Kuv, and 2 is Tes Vav. The is, I don't know how you do that in Hebrew, and the people is Pei Yud, right? Just people. That's what Rashi's saying is happening here. Kan in our Mishnah, when it says Begufan Shalanu, that it's talking about our lettering and it's Bechol Lashon, it's Ksav Ashuris, but it's transliterated into the language of your choice. It must be in Ksav Ashuris. And Kan in the Mishnah from Yadayim, he's talking about Begufan Shalan, that is Ksav Ashuris Mamish, talking in Hebrew with the Hebrew language, and therefore there's no conflict between them at all. Says the Gemara, Amar le Abaye, Abaye says, B'mayu kimto lehahi, how did you understand the Mishnah in Yadayim? You said that was talking about Begufan Shalahan, that it was talking about the letters that are actually Ksav Ashuris. So says the Gemara, if that's the case, then my area, why is it that the Mishnah in Yadayim at the bottom of Chesed Beis says, Mikra Shekasvo Targum and Targum Shekasvo Mikra? Why were you then, if your whole point is to say that it's the actual letters of Ksav Ashuris and it's the actual language of Ksav Ashuris, then why does the Mishnah in Yadayim speak about a case of a word that is really Hebrew where you wrote Targum, or a word that's really Targum where you wrote Hebrew? So it says the Gemara, finishing off its question, Afilu mikra shekasvo mikra v'targum shekasvo targum. Nami, no matter what, if you don't write it in Ashuris, it's not kosher. Daktani achi yichtevenu Ashuris al sefer uvidyo. So says the Gemara, your distinction, Rava, that the Mishnah that we have in our Masechta is speaking about Ashuris, but writing and transliterating into any other language, and establishing the Mishnah in Yadayim to be a Mishnah that speaks about using Ksav Ashuris for Hebrew, that can't be, because then the beginning of the Mishnah in Yadayim doesn't make sense. And that leads us then to our second answer. We're 6 lines down on Testament Aleph. Ella, says the Gemara, lo kashya. It's not a problem for another reason. Our Mishnah, the Tanakama of our Mishnah, and the Mishnah in Yadayim is not a stira. One is talking about the Shita of the Rabbanon, and one is talking about the Shita of Rab Shimon ben Gamliel. So the Shita of Rab Shimon ben Gamliel is going to be the halacha of Yadayim, where he says Ashuris, and the Shita of the Rabbanon is going to be the Tanakama of our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, if you want to say that the Mishnah in Yadayim is really the Shita of Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, and it's speaking about Ksav Ashuris, we have a problem. And the problem lies in our Mishnah. What did Rab Shimon ben Gamliel say in our Mishnah? Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, ha'ika Yevanis. If we speak about Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, he says it's not only Ksav Ashuris, it's also Greek. So therefore, we can't say that this is the distinction of the Rabbanan and Rab Shimon ben Gamliel. So we move on to our third answer to our stira between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Yadayim. Ella, says the Gemara, lo kashya, kan b'svarim, kan b'tfilin u'mitzuzos. Our Mishnah in Maseches Megillah is speaking about Svarim, Tanakh. That's where the Tanakama says that any language is kosher. However, when it comes to the Mishnah in Yadayim that says that it has to be Ksav Ashuris, that's talking about tefillin and mezuzos. Asks the Gemara, tefillin and mezuzos, my taima. Why is it that we would, if this is the case, why would it be the case that tefillin and mezuzos have to be Ksav Ashuris? Oh, so says the Gemara, my time. The reason is because mishum dechsiv behu v'hayu. It says in both of these mitzvos by tefillin and mezuzah v'hayu hadivarim ha'ele v'hayu b'haviyasan yehu. As it was given, it needs to be. So therefore, because it has the pasuk, the parshios were pushed into the batim, and the parshios were pushed into the mezuzah, and the pasuk says v'hayu hadivarim ha'ele, and v'hayu has to be just like it was given. Therefore, it has to be ksav ashuris. Says the Gemara, fine, but still, this distinction doesn't really work. How are we understanding things now that the Mishnah from Yadayim is speaking about tefillin and mezuzos? So says the Gemara, my targum shekasvu mikra ikra. The whole thing about the Mishnah in Yadayim was that it spoke about a case where there was Targum that was written as Mikra and Mikra that was written as Targum. And the Gemara says, Bishlama Torah, I understand that in the Torah, we actually have some of these things. Ika Yagar Sahadusa, the famous example where in the Pasuk it says Yagar Sahadusa, and then Yaakov referred to it as Galeid, which is the same exact thing. One's in Aramaic, but it's part of the language of the Torah. Fine. Elahacha, but in Tefillin and Mezuzos, my Targumika. If the Mishnah in Yadayim is going to be speaking about the case of tefillin and mezuzos, then it has to be Metzias, what the Mishnah is talking about. And if the Mishnah says that there's a case of Targum that was written as Mikra, and we're trying to figure out if it works, that's got to be the reality. So where is that? So then the Gemara rejects answer number 3.
Maybe Totafos is a foreign word.
Yeah, the Gemara says elsewhere that's a freaky, that word is an African word. I don't know what that means, but that's what the Gemara says. Where's that? We learned that somewhere. Is that brachos somewhere? Sure. It's in what?
It's a Rashi, so it probably came from the Gemara.
I probably thought it was an open Gemara, but that's not Targum. That's not Targum. It wasn't a translation. It was a borrowed word. But that's a great question. I thought about that while I was learning this, but I didn't look it up. That's a great question. So it says the Gemara, because of this question, we reject this third answer and we move on to answer number 4. Elalo kashya kan b'Megillah kan b'Sfarim. The Mishnah in Yadayim is speaking about the Megillah of Esther, and kan b'Sfarim, our Mishnah in Megillah is talking about Sfarim of Tanakh. So it says the Gemara, Megillah my time. What's the Havamina to assume that a Megillah would be Biksav Ashuris only, as it is written and according to their language, and that would mean Ksav Ashuris. Says the Gemara, what are the samplings within the Megillah? My Targum Shekasva Mikra Ika. What are the samples of Aramaic that are found inside the Megillah? Says the Gemara, 2 answers. On number 1, Amar Rav Papa, Vinishma Piskam Hamelech. And it was heard the word of the king. Now, Piskam is an Aramaic word. If you've done Shnai Mikra, then you'll know Piskama is a common word. So that's what the Gemara says. Piskam is not a Hebrew word. So that's the example that the Mishnah in Yadayim is bringing, or hinting to, I should say, V'nishma Piskam Amel. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak gives another one. I did not know that this word was Aramaic. So what does the Gemara say? V'chol hanashim yitnu yikar leba'alehem. Who knew? Yikar? To give kavod? Yakar in Hebrew is a modern Hebrew word. I didn't know that. I don't know.
It's also the Megillah.
It's I know, but maybe this usage of kavod is different. But that's what the Gemara says. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak treats this word as a word of Targum, and he uses it as the sample to validate the Mishnah in Yadayim as functioning as referencing Megillah.
Haraya in the Ksuba, Lashon Dardan is Aikir, which means that it's probably.
Started.
What about
It's interesting, but which came first? So
I think the chicken was the Torah.
Vano.
Oker ve'ozin ve'afarna. Whatever the language.
The chicken came before the egg. That's a little dangerous for a recorded Daf Yomi show.
The chicken came before the egg.
Oh,
Probably no.
Yeah, I don't know who's listening to my Daf Yomi shiur, but I think the chicken came before the egg. So that's what the Gemara says. We're about a third of the way down, and then we see answer number 5. By the way, just to be clear, the first 3 answers were rejected. Answer number 4 is acceptable. The distinction being that our Mishnah in Megillah is speaking about Sifrei Tanakh, and the Mishnah in Yadayim is speaking about the Megillah. That works. Rav Ashi says a different and more complex answer. Rav Ashi Amar Kitanya Hahi. When the word Tanya is a difficult word here because it's not a brisa. Should it be Kitnan or something like that? It's Kitanya Hahi. When that Mishnah from Yadayim was taught, it was not talking about Tanakh. It was talking about shiur Svarim. So Rashi here says shiur Svarim is scrolls that exclude the 5 books of Moses and include Nevi'im and Ksuvim only. So then the way that this would work is that our Mishnah is speaking about the Torah, the 5 books of Moshe, the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, and what the Mishnah in Yadayim on the bottom of the page is speaking about is only Nevi'im and Ksuvim that have to be B'Ksav Ashuris. Okay, and also the Rav Ashi adds the Rabbi Yehuda. It's also the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Titania, we have a brisa, and we're going to see 3 versions of this brisa because the brisa is very, very difficult to understand at face value. What does the brisa write? Tefillin and mezuzos ein nichtaven ela ashuris. This is a shita that we saw that tefillin and mezuzos they have to be in ashuris. V'rabosenu hitiru yavanis. Now this part is the hard part, and the rabbis allowed for tefillin and mezuzos to be written in Greek. It almost looks like the wires got crossed. That's not what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah didn't say tefillin and mezuzos could be written in Greek, only the Sifrei Torah. So the Gemara says, you can't say that Rabosenu hitiru yavanis, that the rabbis allowed for tefillin and mezuzos to be written in Greek. We just said that by the tefillin, by the mezuzos, the pasuk says, "V'hayu b'av yasan yehu." You're not allowed to do that in any other language other than Ksav Ashuris. Ella, therefore, let's see the second version of this brisa. Ella ema, really what it should say is Svarim nichtav b'chol lashon v'rabosenu hitiru Yavanis. Really, all of the scrolls should be able to be written in any language, and the rabbis allowed even Yavanis. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. Hitiru, when the rabbis say Hitiru Michlal, the Tanakama Osar, but the Tanakama was not Osar. The Tanakama said all languages. So what do you mean? All the languages are mutter. Yes, I agree, and even Greek. It's all languages. What you obviously are making an error in the language. Ella, so says the Gemara version 3 of this brisa, and the final version of this brisa, which actually works. Ella ema, really what it should say is Ella ema Rabosenu lo hitiru sheyichtavu Ella Yavanis. It's a limiting comment. And this, the Mefarshim explain, is attributed to Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, which is exactly his language at the end of our Mishnah. Lo hitiru sheyichtavu Ella Yavanis. Lo hitiru sheyichtavu Ella Yavanis. And that is what the brisa means. So the brisa would then conclude that the Tanakama holds Svarim nichtav mechol lashon, and then Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel limits it to be only in Yavanis. V'tanya Amar Rabbi Yehuda af ksheitiru Rabosenu Yavanis, when the rabbis argued with the Tanakama in our Mishnah, who held that it was all languages were allowed for a scroll. And then Lo hitir el b'sefer Torah, when we allowed Yavanis, it was only true by a sefer Torah. Umishum ma'aseh the Talmai Hamelech. And the reason why we allowed Yavanis was because of the famed story of the king of Egypt, Talmai Hamelech, or Ptolemy, as we would say in the English parlance. Not much of a difference, because we know the famous story of the 72 rabbis. This is the story. And we're going to see the 15 textual changes that took place, seemingly derech nevuah v'nes. It's not normal. I was just talking to Rabbi Michel before we started tonight about something that is extremely rare, I believe, in Jewish history that comes out in this Gemara. And I'll highlight it when we get there. Tanya, 2/3 of the way down. The Brisa writes, Maisa b'talmai hamelech. There's a story with Talmai, the king of Egypt. Shekines shivim u'shnaim zikenim. He collected 72 rabbis. V'yichnisan b'shivim v'shnaim batim. And he put them in 72 houses. Below gila lahem al ma kinsan. He didn't tell them why he gathered them. V'nichnas eitzel kol echad ve'echad. And he walks into each house and he gives each of them a task. And nobody knows what the other person's task is. You need to write for me the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, all of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Now, Nasan HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'leiv kol echad ve'echad eitza. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave advice to each of these people, and now help me translate these words. V'hiskimu kulan l'das achas. They all agreed to one thing.
Yeah, I don't think it means they agreed to Hashem. They all agreed with each other.
How? That was exactly what I said to Rabbi Michel. So the pashtus of this Gemara is that they had a network of nevuah, which is extremely rare in history, right? That's not normal. So what is v'hiskimu? It says v'hiskimu kulan l'das achas. They all agreed. Does it mean they all agreed, like, cognitive telepathy? Like, is it that nevuah? It doesn't mean that they ended up biyadayim, writing the same exact thing, and that's what it means that hiskimu kula. Hiskimu sounds like, what should we do, Rabbosai? Okay, he's going to come back and cross-reference everything. Let's all write the same. That's what it sounds like. So Rabbi Michel said the only other time that he could think of offhand where we had massive. I mentioned the Aseres HaDibros. Everybody died, Parcha Nishmasam, and then they were put back in. That was That was the primary time that we had a public nevuah. But other than that, he said Eldad and Meidad. That was another possibility. But if this language is right, it requires research. Then if we're learning it right, and I'm not sure we are, but if we are, then it could be a very unique occurrence in Jewish history. Rashi doesn't say anything. So the Gemara then tells us, what?
Maybe it isn't on the people. Maybe it's on the fact that all the words came together.
It could be the words, the Gemara, we wouldn't have spoken like that. V'hiskimu. V'hiskimu is there's what to debate, and we concluded that's v'hiskimu. V'kasfu.
Yeah, but still, even when you have the plural of they all agreed, you could say that the word that they finally put down were all the same. That's what the agreement was. Instead of them sitting together in a chabura and deciding, it's just that's how the words came out.
Yeah, there's independent.
For sure, that it's right. I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just saying the language is Omer Dorsheni because it looks not like the way you're saying it. It looks like it was a public, a network nevuah, whatever. How's there a word for it? I don't know. I don't know what the language is. But yeah, that would have been amazing. P.S. It's very hard to explain this Gemara without saying that, and it's very hard to explain the Gemara saying that. So I don't know what the answer is. So then let's learn all the 15 changes. Some of them are famous and obvious, others are more subtle. The Kasvulo, they all wrote for him, for Talmai HaMelech. The first change was on the pasuk number 1. Instead of writing Bereshis bara Elokim, they wrote Elokim bara Bereshis. Because if you say Bereshis bara Elokim, there was this entity called Bereshis that was bara Elokim that created a god, Rahman al-Islam. That's Kvira. And then Adam b'tzelemu v'dmus. That's not what we have. It's Nase Adam b'tzelmenu kidmusenu. So they all changed that pasuk as well. Vaychal bayom hashvi'i vayishbos bayom hashvi'i. Hard to understand if you say he stopped on Shabbos. It implies he did malacha on Shabbos. So they changed it to shishi. Zachar nekeva bira'o. The next 3 words should be deleted. Zachar nekeva bira'o, and it was bira'am. Hava should have been nerda. Right, Hava Erdava Avalesham Sifasam by the Migdal Bavel, but Titzchak Sara Bikroveha should have been Bikirba, changed because seemingly Rashi writes that Avraham had laughed also. He wasn't called to task for laughing, but she was called to task. Sounds a little bit fishy. Why was only one of them? So they changed it to Bikroveha. Ki be'apam hargu shor. That was not what the pasuk says. Ki be'apam hargu ish. They killed people. We didn't want them to think that the Jews were violent. It doesn't say noseh b'nei adam in the pasuk. The pasuk says vayarkivem ala chamor. So noseh b'nei adam is more chashav. Rashi writes that they shouldn't think. Talmai HaMelech shouldn't think that Moshe put them on a donkey, which is not a mechubad animal. Why did he put it on a donkey? Good question. But that they changed it. They didn't want him to think the wrong thing. Moshe, next pasuk. This is the 9th one. I have on the side. I counted. I wasn't counting as we moved along. Sorry about that. 4 lines from the bottom. And they added in it was shar aratzos. And it should be the added word shloshim shana ve'arba me'os shana. Rashi, very lengthy Rashi. We're not going to go through it because it would take us 5 minutes. Who discusses a mathematical challenge with this pasuk and thus the reason as to why they changed the language of the pasuk. And then it should have said Vayishlach es atzile b'nei Yisrael, but atzile is a word that can have some other implications, and they changed it to za'atute. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi, 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Za'atute lashon chashivus. Aval nare lashon katnus, and that you can't say atzile, which references children. It had to be a higher, stronger language, so they changed it to zatute b'nei Israel. And the next pasuk as well, bel zatute b'nei Israel lo shalach yado. That was the 11th change. As we turn to the top of Testament Beis, the Gemara says about Moshe Rabbeinu, lo, it should have been lo chamor, that he didn't touch anything of theirs. What's the exact language? Lo chamor echad mehem nasasi. Change lo chamad echad mehem nasasi, because it would have said lo chamor, I did not covet any of their animals. Okay, but maybe you coveted something else of theirs. You had to get rid of all that. Lo chamad, I had no desires for anything that was theirs. Next, asher chalak Hashem elokecha osam, and we added in the word laha'ir l'chol ha'amim to forego a misunderstanding that could have happened. And as well, vayelech v'yavad elkim acher masher lo tzivisi le'ovdam. Le'ovdam is also added. And lastly, and I would say probably most strategically, is that you don't want to mess with Talmai HaMelech's wife. Talmai HaMelech's wife, her name was Arneves. And an Arneves is a hyrex or a rabbit, however we define it in modern English. The Kasvulo, instead of writing about the Arneves, that it was an Arneves, they wrote Es Tziras Haraglayim, the one with short legs. Velo Kasvulo Es Harneves Mibnei Sheishto Shel Talmai Arneves Shema. Oi, wow. Shelo Yomar.
Maybe she went by Bunny.
The original Bunny.
That's not bad. That's Dr. Karesh level humor right there. That is Dr. Karesh level humor. That means you're an old man, Danny.
Middle age.
You did start young, Dad. It's true. You did start young. Shelo Yomar Sacha Kubia Yehudim. The Jews are joking around with me and my family. V'itilu Shem Ishti b'Torah, and to sneak in a little jab, they wrote my wife's name as an Arneves. So she's a little furry animal, you know. So they took out her name and wrote Seirei Raglayim.
Wasn't a good guy. This guy. They were afraid of him.
Oh, l'chora. I mean, you know, Egyptian leadership has not historically been very good to the Jews. So no, I don't blame them for feeling a little uncomfortable. We also had a pasuk in Chumash, which says that we were going to be b'shuvah to Mitzrayim for a while. So they had a lot to fear. Now remember where all this brisa comes from. This is why we use Yavanis, right? So then let's get into the details about that. We're at the 2 dots, 8 lines down or so, Testament base. Rashbag Omer, Af Besvarim Lo Yitir Shichtvel Yavanis, Amar Rabbi Yabo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Halacha Kerashbag. We hold like him that you can write the Torah only in Hebrew and in Yavanis. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, my time of Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, why does he say that you're allowed to use Yavanis? It's not because of Talmai HaMelech. It's not because of the fear of anybody. That's not right. We don't change halacha because we're afraid of someone. That's not right. Amar Kra, says the Gemara, because the pasuk says, Yafta Elokim Yefes v'yishkom b'olei shem. It has to be from the family of Yefes. One of the members of the family of Yefes was Yavan. Dvarav shel Yefes yihu b'olei shem. The words of the descendants of Yefes should be b'olei shem in the Yiddish Batei Medrash, and it's okay. It's a pasuk in Chumash. It's not Hellenism. It's the way we understand the pasuk. Says the Gemara, Yavan wasn't the only child of Yefes. The Amar Gomeru Magog. What about his other kids? Well, not Grace, it's Tzadikim. But maybe they had their own languages, and maybe we should include theirs instead of Yavanis. Says the Gemara, Amar B'chia bar Abba Hainu Taimad D'chsiv Yafta Elokim LeYefes Yafiyuso Shel Yefes Yehei Be'oholei Shem. It has to be the best of all the languages. What was the best about it? Did it sound the best? Did it look the best? Did it feel whatever? Well, we don't know. The Gemara doesn't say. And that is why we have Yavanis. That brings us to a new Mishnah. We'll learn this next Mishnah, and the next one will go all 3 lines until the bottom of the page, and then we'll stop. Tomorrow's blot is not small. The Amud Beis, Yud Amud Beis is a big daf, but it's mostly Agarata, and it moves pretty quickly. But let's finish today's daf first. So about a quarter of the way down on Testament Beis, the Mishnah writes, Ein bein kohen mashuach b'shemen hamishcha lemeruba begadim elapar haba alkol hamitzvos. It used to be in the first Beis Hamikdash, and Rashi highlights this, that up until the times of King Yoshia, we used to have the kli that had the oil for Mashiach b'shemen, but then it was lost. So all the Kohanim Gedolim in the first Beis Hamikdash up to Yoshia were anointed by the oil. From the time of Yoshia and onwards, and certainly throughout the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, those Kohanim were not Mashuach b'shemen. The way that they became a Kohen Gadol was by putting on all 8 begadim. It's what's called meruba begadim. So let's go back to our Mishnah. Ein bein, there's no difference between a Kohen Gadol who's Mashuach b'shemen, hamishcha, versus one who becomes a Kohen Gadol lemeruba begadim by wearing a lot of clothing, the 8 garments. Ella par haba al kol mitzvos. What is a par haba al kol mitzvos? So Rashi, about 15 lines down, Dibur Hamaschel par haba al kol mitzvos, explains as follows: Kohen Mashiach, if you have a Kohen Gadol, shahore heter bedavar, who gave a leniency. But the leniency he gave was shezedono kares. He didn't do it on purpose, but he gave a leniency that had that action been done on purpose, then it would have been a kares punishment. Let's say he told everyone today is not the 10th of Tishrei. That is the 9th, and everybody ate bread and food, and they ate the wrong amount of food on the wrong day. So since it was Zedono Kares, then he's obligated to bring this korban. So the only time that a Kohen Gadol would have to bring that is if he's Mashuach b'shemen. But the person who's Meruba Begadim, the Kohen Gadol who became the Kohen Gadol only by putting on the 8 garments, he doesn't bring that korban. That's part 1 of the Mishnah. Part 2, Ein bein Kohen Meshamish the Kohen Sha'avar. There's no difference between the current Kohen Gadol, the one who's Meshamish, who's serving, the Kohen Sha'avar, the Kohen Gadol Emeritus. There's no difference between them. Ella to say Par Yom HaKippurim v'Asiri Seifa is that the Kohen Meshamish will bring the Par Yom HaKippurim and do the Asiri Seifa, and the Kohen Emeritus, the Kohen Gadol Emeritus, will not. The Gemara opens, as it has all the way through with the Ein Beins, that in regards to the first part of the Mishnah, the difference between the Kohen Gadol who's Mashuach b'shemen and the Kohen Gadol who becomes the Kohen with Meruba Begadim, Hala'inyan Par Yom HaKippurim v'Asiri Seifa, happens to be the factor that's mentioned in the second part of the Mishnah. But in regards to the ratio of the Mishnah, between these 2 types of anointing a Kohen, that would be the same for both of them. Zev is Eshav, and they both bring those items. And Masnis in our Mishnah, Deloki Rav Meir, cannot fit like the opinion of Rav Meir. Because in the ratio of our Mishnah, we said that the difference between a Kohen Mashuach b'shem and a Mishcha and a Kohen of Meruba Begadim, we said the difference was that only the Kohen Mashuach b'shem and a Mishcha would bring this par when there's a mistake in his psak. But Rav Meir doesn't hold that way. Rav Meir, if it was Rav Meir Hatanya, the Brisa writes, explicitly not like our Mishnah. Meruba begadim, maybe par habal kol mitzvahs even Rav Meir, explicitly. Our Mishnah says that it's only the Kohen HaMashuach b'shem and HaMishcha. Rav Meir says it's even the guy who's Meruba begadim. The Chachamim are probably the authors of our Mishnah who argue against Rav Meir. and ask the Gemara, my time of Rav Meir. Why does Rav Meir say that the Kohen who became the Kohen Gadol by Meruba Begadim, by putting on all 8 Begadim, why does he say that he's chayiv in this korban? So he says, it's pretty simple. I have a brisa. What does the brisa say? Halfway down, Titania, Mashiach, the pasuk refers to Mashiach, Ein li ela mashuach b'shem hamishcha. I only know that the korban of the par is brought by a Kohen Gadol who gets anointed with the Mashiach, Mashuach b'shem hamishcha. Meruba begadim meinayin. How do I know that a Kohen Gadol who becomes the Kohen Gadol because he was Meruba begadim, he put on 8 begadim, that he's going to bring this korban? Talmud Lomar HaMashiach. So very good. So it's very clear from this presentation that Rav Meir cannot be the author of our Mishnah, because the Reisha says that the par is not brought by a Kohen Gadol who is only a Kohen Gadol by having put on the Meruba Begadim. But Rav Meir says that is the case. So that doesn't work. So then the Gemara argues this idea. B'mayu kimna, how did you just establish our Mishnah? You said it was the Loki Rav Meir. You said that our Mishnah is not like Rav Meir. Says the Gemara, but I'm stuck. Hey, Maseifa, when I look at the end of our Mishnah, that is exactly Rav Meir, and that's going to pose a problem. Hey, Maseifa, what does our brisa say? What does our Mishnah say? Ein bein kohen mishamesh, the kohen she'avar. There's no difference between the current active kohen gadol and the kohen gadol emeritus. Ela par yom kippur maser seifa, ala chol divrei and zev zeh shavin, asan Rav Meir. And the way that it works out is that Rav Meir perfectly agrees with this idea of the seif of our Mishnah, that the difference between the active Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Gadol emeritus is whether or not they bring the Par Yom Kippurim and make the daily Asir Seifa. And how do we know that Rav Meir agrees with the Seifa? Titania, the Brisa writes and tells us this exactly. Ira bo psul, if the current Kohen becomes puzzle, uminu Kohen acher tachtav, and they pull someone out of the bullpen, southpaw. Oh, that's illegal, actually. You can't pull a southpaw for a Kohen Gadol. I didn't even think about that until it happened. All right, we need a righty. So they bring in the righty Kohen, and he takes over. He's just filling in. Now, when Rishon Choser Lavodaso, when the first Kohen Gadol heals from his psul, he's back at the post, Sheni, then the second Kohen, the one who filled in, Kol Mitzvahs Kuna Gadola Alav, he still has the status of a Kohen Gadol, just like our Mishnah. Divrei Rav Meir. However, Rabbi Yossi Omer Choser, Rishon Choser Lavodaso, that when the initial Kohen who became puzzle comes back to work, Sheni Eno Roy Lo Kohen Gadol Lo Kohen Hedyot, he's out of work. If you have a Kohen Gadol who substitutes even for a day, he can never again be the Kohen Gadol, and he can never again be the Kohen Hedyot. And this actually happened 2/3 of the way down. V'amar Rav Yossi, Ma'aseh Rabbi Yosef ben Ulam mitzipori. Rabbi Yosef ben Ulam from Tzipori, shiur bo psul b'Kohen Gadol. The initial Kohen Gadol, the primary Kohen Gadol, had a psul. Uminuhu tachta, and this yid was put in a chashva yid. He became the Kohen Gadol. Uva'ma'aseh lifnei chachamim. They said, okay, the initial Kohen came back. What does this Jew do? What's his behavior? V'amru, they said, like Rabbi Yossi said in the brisa we just learned. Rishon Choser Lavodasa, when the first guy comes back, Sheni Eno Roi Lola Kohen Gadol Lola Kohen Hedyot. He's out of work. Kohen Gadol Mishum Eva. He can't be a viable option for a Kohen Gadol because that will cause for tension between the current and him as a backup. Kohen Hedyot is not allowed. Why can't you be a Kohen Hedyot once you've been the Kohen Gadol? Because of the halachic principle Mishum Malin Bekodesh Vein Moridin. How many begadim do you wear when you're a Kohen Gadol? 8. So now you're going to go back down and wear 4. Pasnisht. It's malin b'kodesh vein moridin. You can only go up. So once the guy is pulled out of the bullpen to become the Kohen Gadol, he could never be a Kohen Hedyot ever again. He's done. Now, what do we see from here? We see that in the totality of our Gemara, that the Reisha does not work for Rav Meir, but the Seifa fits perfectly with Rav Meir. So says the Gemara, we're 12 lines from the bottom of the page, Reisha Rabbanon, the Sefer of Meir. Are you going to tell me that the Reisha, which definitely doesn't work for Rav Meir, is the Rabbanon, and the end, which works for Rav Meir, is Rav Meir? That's not the right way to write a Mishnah. The right way to write a Mishnah is to have everyone be the same Shita. You're not giving me any names in our Mishnah. It's an anonymous Mishnah. Everything should be the same. So tell me it's all Rav Meir, and tell me that it's all Rabbanon. But you're going to tell me the Reisha, the first 2 lines of the Mishnah is Rav Meir, is the Rabbanon, and the Seif is Rav Meir. So Rav Chizet seemed to not really have much of a problem with that. Not a type A personality where he's going to be so rigid about it. Rav Chizet yeah, no problem. Reisha Rabbanon, the Seif Rav Meir. Who cares? What's the problem? Says the Gemara, Rav Yosef Amar, no, that's not correct. You're right. It really should all be one person's psak. And that is in fact the case. Rav Yosef Amar, Rebbehi. This Mishnah follows the shita of Rabbi Resha and Seifa. It just happens to be Nasif Lali B'Tanai. He happens to hold like different people. He holds like the Rabbanan for the Resha and Rav Meir for the Seifa. But still, our authorship of our Mishnah is under the auspices of Rabbi. One more quick Mishnah, and then we'll stop and the Gemara to follow. The Gemara says, "Ein bein bama gedola lebama katana el psachim." At times in Jewish history, we were allowed to use a bama. Not always, at rare times. We'll discuss some of that a little bit more tomorrow. A bama gedola was basically a reference to the mizbeach in a mishkan, whenever the mishkan was standing. And a bama katana is a self-built, man-made type of pyre where korbanos were brought. The only difference between them is psachim, that el psachim, that when it comes to the korban pesach, that has to be brought on a bama gedola, on a mizbeach in a mishkan, but on a bama katana cannot be brought. But then the Mishnah goes on to contradict itself. Zeh haklal. Here's the general rule. Kol shehu nidar v'nidev karev bebama. Whenever there is something that is nidar v'nidev, then it can be brought on a bama. However, v'chol she'enu lo nidar v'lo nidev, if it's a korban that was not guaranteed, that no one promised to Hashem, eno karev bebama. So I don't understand. Says the Gemara, psachim v'sulo. You said that the difference between a bama gadol and a bama ketana is psachim, but then the second half of the Mishnah says, not only psachim, but any korban that's lo nidar v'lo nidev also can't be brought. So it's not just psachim. The Gemara says you're right. It didn't mean it the way you're reading it. Ema ke'ein psachim. It's only that it is like the korban pesach. Says the Gemara, money. Who is our Mishnah like? That's Reb Shimon. The Tanya. Reb Shimon Omer af tzibur. Lo hikrivu el psachim v'chovos shekavu lem zman. The only korbanos that could be brought on a bama, says Rav Shimon, is the korban pesach and chovos that have to come at a specific time. Aval chovos she'ein kavu lahem zman. If you have an obligatory korban that you have to bring, but it doesn't come with a specific time, hacha v'hacha lo karev, that can't be brought neither on a bama ketana or on a bama gedola. We'll stop right here. Here's Hashem tomorrow night, 8:40. We will pick up at the very bottom of Testament Bays with yet another Ein Bain. Wishing you all a beautiful night.